In 2021, the UK economy had a gross domestic output of 2.2 trillion British pounds, making it the fifth largest economy in the world behind China, Japan, the United States, and Germany. The economic effects of the coronavirus pandemic caused the UK economy to fall by a record 9.4% in 2020. The UK economy has, in some aspects, effectively rebounded from the pandemic's abrupt blow. 2021 saw a 7.5% annual GDP growth rate, and the unemployment rate swiftly returned to its pre-pandemic levels of under 4%. Nevertheless, the UK appears ready to dive right into its worst cost of living crisis since the 1970s, driven by rising prices, tax increases, and geopolitical instability despite the economic recovery. In contrast, the inflation rate increased quickly toward the end of 2021 and reached a 30-year high of 6.2% in February. There are speculations about whether or not the UK will be the next, after Greece, in 2009 to kick off the next Eurozone crisis. The Eurozone crisis, also known as the European debt crisis, is a multi-year debt crisis that affected the European Union, EU, through to the mid and late 2010s. The Eurozone crisis is also known as the European sovereign debt crisis. There are several reasons why this crisis occurs. For one, a balance of payments crisis, or a sudden cessation of foreign money into the nations that had sizable deficits and were dependent on foreign credit, was the root cause of the Eurozone crisis. Since the euro is a common currency, governments were prevented from devaluing their national currencies, which would have deepened the problem. Further causes include rising household and government debt levels, trade imbalances, structural problems of the Eurozone system, monetary policy inflexibility, and probably loss of confidence. Even before COVID happened, the UK started to experience a major economic drop when it left the European Union. This departure is officially known as BREXIT. It is coined from two words, which are Britain and exit, and is used to describe the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union, which happened on January 31, 2020 at 23:00 GMT. In history, the only independent nation out of the 50 to have done so is the UK. Since January 1st, 1973, the UK has been a member of the European Union, or its equivalent, the European Communities, EC, and occasionally both at the same time. After Brexit happened, British laws no longer took priority over European Union law or the rulings of the European Court of Justice, with the exception of a few circumstances involving Northern Ireland. Quite frankly, it's challenging to really pinpoint the precise effects of Brexit on the UK economy, given how close the COVID-19 pandemic's outbreak followed the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. This exit, Britain's exit from the European Union, has left several scars on the UK's economy. The UK's withdrawal from the European Union in late January 2020 caused a 0.4% decline in GDP in February. Investment Monitor looked at the time after the European Union referendum in the second quarter of 2016 to fully comprehend the UK's economic performance in the wake of Brexit. The UK's GDP increased by 14.3% between the second quarter of 2016 and the third quarter of 2021, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) data. This growth rate is lower than that of four of the biggest EU economies. Germany had the greatest indexed growth rate throughout that time, at 32.2%, ahead of Spain, 25.6%, France, 23%, and Italy, 16.3%. According to research published by the New Joint Resolution Foundation and LCE Research in June this year, Brexit has not had the expected effect of narrowly reducing exports to the EU, but has instead more broadly reduced how open and competitive Britain's economy is, which will reduce productivity and wages in the decade ahead. Another research found that the referendum outcome increased UK inflation by 1.7 percentage points in 2017, costing the typical British family £404 annually. Studies released in 2018 projected that the Brexit vote cost the economy 2 to 5% of GDP. The Financial Times reported in December 2017 that the results of the Brexit referendum had decreased national British income by 0.6% and 1.3%. A Stanford University and Nottingham University report published in 2018 stated that Brexit-related uncertainty decreased company investment by about 6 percentage points and resulted in a 1.5 percentage point decline in employment. British trade abroad decreased starting in June 2016 as a result of the uncertainty caused by Brexit on the UK's future trade policies, according to a number of studies. A 2019 research discovered that European corporations decreased new investments in the UK, while British firms significantly boosted offshore to the EU. This happened after the Brexit vote. The vast majority of economists polled in 2016 agreed that Brexit would probably result in a decline in real per capita income in the UK. The UK economy had been significantly and unevenly impacted by the COVID-19 epidemic. Economic activity was restricted as a result of the necessity to minimize social communication in order to stop the virus transmission, although this effect was lessened by a number of government support measures. 3 countrywide lockdowns and the closure of sites in the contact-intensive hospitality, leisure, and entertainment industries were the most notable restrictions. The government's furlough program, the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, CJRS, which compensated companies to sustain the salaries of furloughed workers, and other government-backed credit programs that assisted businesses in surviving, were the most notable of the mitigating efforts. The worst of the crisis, which saw a 25% decline in GDP between February and April 2020, was followed by a recovery when the initial lockdown ended and the economy acclimated to the ongoing limitations. By April 2021, the GDP had increased to just 4% below its high in January 2020. In February to April 2021, the unemployment rate increased to 4.8% of the labor force, up 0.8 percentage points from the previous year. However, this was a much smaller increase than many had anticipated, in part due to the impact of the furlough program, with an estimated 14% of the workforce being on furlough in March 2021. Basically, the UK economy had been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic in a number of different ways. One such way includes less productivity and working hours of people with jobs. People had to reduce their working hours due to illness, self-isolation, and even to look after their children who were unable to attend school. This absence of working hands resulted in the supply side effect. As it has been, the absence of essential skill employees would result in lower output. And this is exactly what happened. Lower economic activity resulted in a lot of businesses closing. This is especially true for bars, eateries, non-essential shopping, sports facilities, tourist attractions, and theaters that were prohibited from conducting business. Another effect of COVID is reduced investments and desired consumer spending. Families tried to accumulate precautionary saving balances, and companies postponed investments until there was more clarity regarding the course of the virus and its repercussions. This demand side effect resulted from the increased uncertainty at the time. Eventually, there was reduced supply and demand from other nations battling COVID-19. This effect also resulted in disruptions to supply chains and a restricted supply of components made in other nations, in addition to a decrease in export demand. It also takes into account the results of fewer tourists coming to the UK due to the pandemic. Due to public health limitations brought about by the coronavirus pandemic at the end of the first quarter, which is January to March 2020, non-essential stores and shops were closed, and it was advised that people only visit vital retailers when absolutely required. Because of the uncertainties surrounding the pandemic at the early stage, some consumers stocked up on particular things, leaving some businesses with bare shelves of some necessary commodities. During the worst of the pandemic, many retail stores were completely closed as the first UK-wide lockdown took place. According to the Business Impact of Coronavirus Survey, BICS, over a quarter, 27% of all wholesale and retail trade enterprises ceased operations from March 23 to April 9, 2020. Many of those that remained in business switched entirely to internet sales. Brexit has also impacted the UK's labour market and then the economy at large. Since the referendum, several European Union citizens who now reside in the UK have claimed to feel unwanted, which may have led to some of them leaving the kingdom. This has obviously led to a declining workforce in the UK statistics. Recruiting from the European Union has become more difficult for UK businesses as a result of Brexit. Free movement of persons was replaced by a new points-based immigration system after the conclusion of the Brexit transition period. European Union citizens are now treated in the same way as non-European Union citizens, which means they frequently need to fulfill requirements like wage levels and English language proficiency in order to receive a work visa. It has been challenging to replace them in industries like agriculture, food manufacture, and haulage, all of which previously employed significant numbers of EU citizens. While COVID and Brexit both played a part in supply chain challenges, they also brought to light consistent structural issues with the labor supply in certain industries. We mentioned at the beginning of this video the things that could result in a Eurozone crisis. So far, we have seen what COVID, Brexit, supply chains disruptions have all done to the UK economy. Debate is still on whether or not if all these will cause the UK to bring the next Eurozone crisis. While that is still under debate, one thing is for sure. The UK economy needs to recover fast because a recession has already been predicted to be on its way. Who knows? Maybe the Eurozone crisis is more imminent.